Lucy Rose.
I'm Sophie Hannah.
And I'm Mona. Welcome to episode 76 of Ethnically Speaking, the show where we discuss everything affecting the UK's highly melanated communities, from pop culture to current affair and everything in between. We always keep it 100, and today we'll be talking about cancelling cartoons. Space Jam fans! Space Jam 2 is set to be released this summer, but there'll be one noticeable absence. Pepe Le Pew, the skunk, who is known for his persistent romantic advances that are always unwanted. He shall be cancelled because his behaviour is likable to that of persistent sexual predator. But he is not the only character that is being called out, from the likes of Bugs Bunny to Winnie the Pooh, due to the hashtag cancel a cartoon character that has been trending on Twitter. Has cancel culture gone too far by cancelling cartoons? Or do you think there is a genuine concern with problematic cartoons that might be teaching kids unwanted behaviour that could later on manifest to unacceptable behaviour later on in life?
So, okay, I find this whole debate I find it ridiculous. I don't think, first off, that cartoon characters should be cancelled unless in very extreme circumstances, first of all. But second of all, this Space Jam skunk was cancelled. The scene that got cancelled was actually about consent, and it was a reframing of his character. And so it was him at a bar, approaching a woman repeatedly, and then being told off, and then being instructed why that was wrong, and that you always need consent in those circumstances. So to me, it seems strange that actually, this was actually quite a progressive scene in actually moving forward with this character rather than glorifying this behaviour. So if we're looking at cartoons as instructive to children, it seems extremely hypocritical to me that this scene was cancelled in the first place. The other thing is, cartoons, as we know, are not real, and they're fictional. And so what is the purpose of fiction? Is the purpose of fiction to reflect completely, to kind of give a moral instruction to everybody who watches them about how to behave in society, how to behave romantically, and kind of act as a really sort of sad, actually, and incredibly dull, I guess, a kind of guide manual to life? Because I don't think most people see cartoons as life advice or life guidance, and I hope they don't. Because of that, cartoons are supposed to entertain. They're supposed to be, they're a form of entertainment. And I think it gets really worrying when we start censoring fiction, and kind of using it instead to kind of brainwash is the wrong word, because obviously I do agree that things like being a sexual predator are wrong, but kind of you changing the purpose of what cartoons are. Like the one that really stood out to me recently in this whole cancel cartoons debate was changing the ending of Sleeping Beauty. When people were saying that obviously, she's been asleep for 100 years, she can't give consent to the kiss that finally wakes her up out of this spell. And people saying we need to change the ending of this classic movie, this very old fairy tale story. And I think, again, that's dangerous when you're actually changing fictional narratives in order to represent today's views, rather than kind of using them for what they are, a story, not real life. That to me is really worrying.
I completely disagree. I do, man. I really do. I don't think that cartoons are just things that don't have an effect on children. If we think that they're saying like a child's character is formed by the time that they're 7, that's the time when they are the most impressionable, and the things and the messages and the ways of living and behaviour and traditions, they're really taking those all in. And to be honest, I've seen that in my life and in my friend's life. For example, my brother-in-law grew up in Nigeria until the point that he was 10. And then he came to the UK and was living with people who were no longer Nigerian. He didn't live with people who were Nigerian from that point on. But you cannot take the Nigerian out of that man. I am telling you, that thing is deep rooted. Even though the majority of his life he hasn't lived in Nigeria, doesn't speak the language anymore, and wasn't living with Nigerians, there are certain things that are just very linked, that are very traditional, that were created in him. Now that's one example, so we can say that's like an anomaly. But I think children are very susceptible to the messages that they're getting. And I think cartoons are very powerful. I don't think it's a thing about us cancelling problematic cartoons or characters. I think the issue is that there were certain behaviours that were seen as acceptable that weren't acceptable, and they were made by probably men in power and people who thought that these things were kind of okay and that they weren't problematic. But I think looking back, I think there is problematic. Like, I had to sit and think about it. I'm like, there is something problematic about a girl sleeping, or in Sleeping Beauty's dead, basically. She's like in some state of frozenness. That's not even a word, but you get what I mean. And a guy is going over to kiss her. Now, if a little boy's seeing that, we're talking about like a 5-6-year-old how could he not think that if he sees a little girl sleeping, he could go and do that? And not because he understands the difference between consent and right and wrong. It's kind of like, I've seen it. Children imitate what it is that they've seen. And I have 3 nieces, but when I had 2 nieces, I took them to see Wonder Woman, the first one, years ago. And my niece turned to me, but she was young, and she was just like, wow, like, girls really can do anything. Like, these things come across. And the same way, when Frozen was so big, but this was a story that was an empowering story about 2 sisters building their relationship who were strong and were powerful. And you saw that the effect that had on young girls everywhere. Everyone wanted to be Elsa. Everyone wanted to be like, it was so big because there is something that is communicated through visual media. So I think the correction that we're seeing is a correction of ideals that were always wrong, but they were never questioned. And this is the time when women were getting a little slap on the bum and no one thought it was anything cool. All these things were going on when Disney was instituted. I think in the 1930s it was started. 1950s, Sleeping Beauty might have come out as like one of the first ones. No, I think it was Snow White, actually. But anyways, I digress. The point is, that's where I stand on this.
I think that my point's going to go a bit from here to here. I feel that protecting the innocence and the magic of childhood is important. And these cartoons that are quite nostalgic, you know that waking someone who is in a coma by a kiss is not reality. That can't happen, right? I think tweaking it so that it's not a kiss on the lips, but it's a kiss on the cheek or a kiss on the hand, because the theme is to symbolize that love can break any curse. And I know that is it Maleficent, the Maleficent fairy?
Maleficent.
When they redid that story, they rejigged it. And it was the love of the mother that broke the curse. She still kissed her, obviously not on the lips. Actually, I can't really remember. Let me not come and add bits to the story. But she still kissed her, and it was the love of the mother that broke the curse. And essentially, regardless of the character, the idea is that love always wins, right? It's victorious. So I think that having that idea protected, I don't have a problem with it. And I think that, like you said, Nishi, the hypocrisy of trying to educate children by eradicating it like it never happened, instead of actually educating them and teach them important life lessons, I don't understand that. And I feel that when I remember looking at Pepe, we'll just call him Pepe because the Le Pew always gets me off. But when I remember watching him, I always thought, oh, he's so cute. I never got the vibe that he was a sexual predator. There was a bit of a stereotype on French men, but I didn't get the vibe that he was a sexual predator. It never came off to the point where it made me feel uneasy. Now, I know that I'm only one person and I can't speak on behalf of every woman who might have found that to be a bit offensive, but I do think that cancelling, instead of actually retraining or reforming these characters, that seems to be a tad bit extreme to me, because there are things that should be cancelled straight away off the bat. So if we look at Dumbo and the crows that clearly represent the segregation in Jim Crow era, yeah, that needs to be 100% cancelled. If we're talking about Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, and they're sitting there and they're speaking to the Native Americans who are literally chatting gibberish, and trying to pass off that that's the Native American language, 100% that needs to get cancelled. There is a few things that is a bit arguably funny. We've even got the hyenas in Lion King, which is voiced by a predominantly all black cast, Whoopi Goldberg's in it. And again, their language and their dialect is almost to be a stereotype that black people don't really know how to speak properly or they're not educated. Those are things that need to get cancelled straight off. I don't believe in reforming or retraining that. That needs to get cancelled because those ideas are dangerous. And like Sophie said, children are impressionable. So whether they're watching a fictional film, non-fiction, I wouldn't necessarily say that they know the difference in terms of Tinkerbell's fairy dust and putting it on her and are they going to fly? At a young age, of course they don't. But at the same time, it's a very impressionable age to start putting in the seeds of stereotypes, offensive connotations. Yeah, you need to be so careful on what you're pushing in their brain. And if that means that we have to go back to the drawing board, then so be it. Because if we look at things like Family Guy in Cleveland, they're cartoons, but they're definitely not cartoons. That's for children, right? So we don't have to worry too much about what we censor. So explain to me, and this is obviously a rhetorical question, explain to me then, why do we have a black cartoon show, Cleveland, being voiced by a predominantly white cast? What are you saying there then? And some of them had to step down because when they got called out, they were like, oh yeah, okay, no, we put our hands up to this actually. It is a bit wrong, blah, blah, blah. What are you thinking? There's so many things that gets brushed underneath the carpet that is completely wrong. And just because it's a cartoon, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held to the same standards as other shows that wouldn't be allowed to get away with those types of things.
I still think that I think we were saying about redrawing the narrative and kind of correcting these, I guess, inappropriate incidents or character behaviours, like being a sexual predator, that aren't dangerous but are maybe wrong, I guess, and kind of like using that as an example. Again, I still think that the whole point of storytelling is it should go to all parts of the imagination, that it should have ridiculous things, and it shouldn't always be about kind of representing an ideal that we should aspire to or ideas that we should try and like inhabit ourselves. I was reading that one person was saying that Snow White, the thing is, should we take out the poison apple, because does that then plant the seed, plant the idea of giving somebody a poison apple as an act of revenge, or like give children the idea that people should do that to their enemies or people they don't like. That all parts of fairy tales have these things which are negative behaviors. I'd be very angry if someone gave me a poison apple. I would never give anyone a poison apple, and I was raised on that fairy tale as well. I'm like, I don't think, I think, yeah.
You'd be dead if someone gave you a poisonous apple. You wouldn't be very angry. You'd be dead.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I feel like after lockdown, they did a lot of poison to kind of get rid of me. Maybe I'd have a dead foot. But yeah. So like, I think, we're being like super purist about this, because I do agree that in a sense, cartoons do transmit ideas. Like we all have our favorite films from childhood with characters that we loved and maybe kind of adopted as our own and had cuddly toys of or whatever. But did we ever like take example from them about how to behave? I think actually cartoons, I think we're exaggerating the importance and scapegoating cartoons as kind of to basically extricate ourselves as a society. We kind of have this tendency. I think we're focusing on the wrong thing. I don't think that cartoons are to blame. I don't think they're dangerous. And I think the amazing thing about them is that they represent fantasy. And that's the same across all types of fiction. We all grew up, for example, we all watched Space Jam. We saw the sexual predator across the screen, but because we grew up with people who told us that was wrong, I don't think any of us turned into sexual predators ourselves. In fact, as we're saying, like we, even having this conversation, I don't think it affected us in that way. Those aren't the things that affect a child's mind and make them want to behave in negative ways. And so, yeah, I think cartoons are being scapegoated in this whole thing. And I think it's symptomatic of this wider issue with cancel culture, which is we don't always examine the reasons why we're cancelling a person. We don't always listen to the other side. We don't, even as you're saying, Mona, I don't think we often even look at ways that we can kind of change the narrative on these different things and maybe show why it's wrong. If something really is wrong, we just shut them down. And
can I come in, please, Nushi? Can I?
Yeah.
Can I please come in? So, I don't think it's. I don't know if we can say how we think cartoons, and I'm not harping on about cartoons. I don't think they're the sole problem. I'm saying that they play a part in, I think, the way that children are probably molded and understand things, because I don't know how we can say how much we think something has affected us. I don't know if we're probably the judge of that, because I think it is so subtly fed to us. And like, I don't sound like some crazy person, but the notion that a lot of women have, women have that, you know, we want a boyfriend, we want to get married, we want a partner, we want a happily ever after. Where do we think these things come from? Like, do we think that these things that we have watched have not influenced us into thinking that there is a certain amount of happiness that comes from being with somebody, that I just want to find the right person for me, the person who is just right for me, and, you know, I want to get married, and like, these are things that we are fed subtly throughout all of our lives. And as we get older, we have to start thinking, actually, let me start unpicking that. Like, where did that come from? Where did that notion come from? And I'm not saying that it's just from cartoons. I think definitely society plays a part, but what is going on in society feeds into the things that are made and then given to us as a story or a narrative. And I'm not saying that I've ever watched Pepe Le Pew and been like, oh, what a sexual predator. Like, I've never thought that, but that was very much my growing up years. So I'm never really going to question that. I'm always going to think it was harmless. But have I put up with behavior from guys who are probably sexual predators and thought, I'm not going to make a big deal, or I'm not going to say when I feel uncomfortable, or I'm not going to, you know, say like, actually, I don't want that sort of attention. Like, have the way that I react to that, has that been based on the things that I've seen? And I would probably say yes. Like, I would be much happier for sure if these programs talked about consent. So if I put my child or my daughter in front of them and they are constantly seeing in everything, a boy has to ask me to kiss them. And if they're seeing this all the time in the things that they watch, trust me, that's going to have an effect on when they're dating somebody. They're going to be like, that's not how it goes. Like, we do pick up messages from the things, how we expect romance to be. And a lot of times when we have relationships, we're like, this isn't how I thought. Well, based on what? Based on what? So yeah, I think that I think these things are being subtly fed to us, and I think it is time to kind of revisit these things, because once we're starting to put these narratives, like, where do little boys get some of the stuff that they do? You know, like, oh, if a boy hits you, then that means he likes you. You're like, actually, let's rework that narrative. Let's not have little boys thinking that to show his affection, he needs to be violent. Like, these things are very problematic, and
I think that I definitely agree with what you're saying, Sophie, because they do mold us and they do shape us. And I know that I'm only talking of personal experience, but even I remember going way back in the day when we would describe boys in primary school and we would talk about which ones that we like. I always rate people on like a scale, for example, and I'm not talking about a 1 to 10 scale. So I remember my friend fancied this boy, and we were very young, and she was recalling on it now, she was actually trying to describe his mannerisms, but we were young, we were thinking about looks and this and intelligence or whatever. And I remember I said to her, on a scale of Johnny Bravo to Hey Arnold, what are you saying? And she was like, more so Johnny Bravo. I can't stand Johnny Bravo. I couldn't stand him then, and I can't stand him now. And I know exactly why I can't stand him, because he's sexist. I don't like the way that he comes towards women. I don't like his language. I don't like the way he objectifies women. I don't like Johnny Bravo. 6-year-old me didn't like him. 26-year-old me don't like him still. But at that young age, I was able to put that scale in there to know that Hey Arnold was quite quiet and gentle and was very polite, even though I didn't have the vocabulary to know the differences about these two boys or men in a cartoon. I was able to pit them against each other and get my friends to identify the guy that they fancied. Where did he kind of go? And depending on where you put him, I already knew if I liked him or I didn't like him. So yeah, I do believe that cartoons do mold you. And my question to you, Nishi, is, when you said that you don't feel that cartoons are dangerous because of the whole fairy tale thing that they go, how do you feel about cartoons that actually derive from a more sinister standpoint and they're tweaked? So let's look at Pocahontas, for example, glamorizing her relationship with John. Testing my knowledge, I can't remember, is that his name? John Smith?
I think it is
That's
John.
the one. How do we feel about her relationship of her falling in love with the Englishman, Jon Snow, when in reality she was a Native American girl who was raped under the age of 16? She was a child. They took that story, flipped it on its head, and used it all in the name of cartoons. How do we feel? Because I think that's quite dangerous. I think that's insulting to the community. I think it's dangerous because what you're doing is you're kind of glamorizing, even though they don't actually touch on her age. They have drawn her to be quite young, and he does look like a man. I would say she looks like she's in her adolescence. What picture is that painting? And this is where you skate a fine line. And I think you do almost need to kind of be a bit stricter in being a gatekeeper, because that's my point. Sorry, every time I get so heated, my point just goes. But I think you get the gist of my question, Nishi.
I think, okay, so I do have an issue with Pocahontas because, as you say, like, it completely flips and kind of reframes a story of exploitation, colonization, murder, rape, and the destruction of an entire race of people. So I do take an issue with Pocahontas.
But
I think
Lucy, that should be fine for children. They don't know the difference. That's just a harmless message that they're seeing. They're just seeing the love story between a Native American and a man. What are you talking about?
However, look, do you know what, yeah? My issue is because, like, I think it's wrong to give a fake history. I don't think Pocahontas for children is dangerous because they don't know the truth. You know, like, to them, it's about, you know, a singing willow tree and two cultures meeting. But for those of us who do know the truth, that's why it's wrong. I think you should not, like, misrepresent various, you know, examples of historical exploitation and you know, flip them so that, you know, there is this kind of white savior element. There is this love story which is actually built on the bones of countless millions. So in that sense, no, I think that is wrong. But do I think that sort of movie is harmful to children? No. I don't think they're going to watch it because they don't know the context, they don't know the reality, and I guess that's the difference, right? So yeah, that's what I think.
Don't you feel though they don't know the context to that story yet? Please don't feel attacked, by the way. I'm just coming as they come in my head.
No,
they don't know the context to the story yet, which I'm hoping that they will do it later on as they grow up in life. They could arguably come to these certain circumstances with these preconceived ideas and not really be open or expose themselves to be educated to understand the truth. And there is so many cartoons, so many Disney films that are based on this misrepresentation. And where is it okay to say this gets a pass and this doesn't get a pass? Because even going off Space Jam, for example, I know for a fact Lola Bunny had it going on. And the way that she swished her hips and those two, whatever she had on her head, her two ears, and made bugs go crazy, I tried to replicate that too. Even at my young age, I didn't know what she was doing, but I knew whatever she had, I wanted it too. And at a young age, you are able to pick up on these cues. It's true though. And if these things that are able to influence children, how can we say then that will influence that I don't think they'll see in that light. We need to give children credit more than what we do. They are little masterminds. It's like copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste.
Can I say as well, because I was going to say, like, you're saying that cartoons are harmless because they're fictional. So what isn't harmless? Like, should we let children watch, like, Nicki Minaj, Megan Thee Stallion videos? Is that harmless because they don't understand as well? Because they don't generally understand what's going on in there. They can see the movements and the sexualizations and they might imitate it because of what they've seen. And I think it was Keira Knightley was saying how she doesn't let her children watch certain cartoons. When I first saw that, I was like, oh, it's ridiculous. But then I actually thought about it. I'm like, actually, I don't want my children to constantly think that a man is going to come and save them. Or that you can fall in love with a stranger that you've never met and you don't know anything about and he could just be the one. Like, these things are very subtle messages. And like they said, Moana was like the first Disney character not to have a love interest. And I'm thinking, I was watching a film the other day. It wasn't the best. It was Second Act with Jennifer Lopez in it. And I remember sitting down and watching this and like, where's the love interest? Where is he? This is just a story about her like starting her business. Where's the guy? Where's the love? And I had to be like, Sophie, what are you talking about? Like, you're not used to seeing a woman's narrative without a man. And it's, a lot of the times part of her story is her falling in love. That's part of her thing, if not the main thing. Generally with the women, it's the main thing. But in this one, the guy was a complete sub-character, and this was about her really taking charge of her life in her 40s plus and really, deciding to go after her dreams. And I'm thinking, these are the things that we have seen constantly. And then as women, we get older and feel like, am I doing something wrong? Because I haven't met a guy yet. When am I going to settle down? And this is the stuff that I'm afraid of having, because boys don't have this, because this is not the stories that they're told. These are not the narratives that they're told in these stories. They're like, you can be this, you can be that, you can be the sailor, you can be the explorer, you can go Raiders of the Lost Ark and be an archaeologist. You can do all of these things and you can have a chick on the side. Whereas girls, we don't get that, and we're thinking that this doesn't affect the way that we now play out our gender roles when we get older. I think it does, and I think that's why we're now seeing much more empowering stories like Brave and, like I said, Frozen 2, because they're saying they want to empower girls because they're going to imitate what it is that they see.
Going off what Nushi said about it not all being doom and gloom for the cartoons, at the end of the day, these cartoons don't make themselves. Someone makes it. You've got animations team, writing team, someone makes them. And that's where my problem is, because even though something could be passed off as innocent, it doesn't come from an innocent place. And going off what you've said, Sophie, about gender roles, if we look at characters like Ursula from The Mermaid, I think his name is Him from Powerpuff Girls, if I'm correct, Hades from Hercules, this idea that all the villains are gay or demonstrate some sort of gay trait,
or
that's very dangerous.
Unattractive, overweight, just all these subtle images of what the bad person looks like, whereas the 100%. Good person is the good-looking slim one.
Very, very, very true. And I remember having this conversation with one of my gay friends, and I thought, you know what? Because it didn't affect me, that was something that went over my head, and I needed somebody else to bring that to my attention. The same way that the narratives that I might feel about, like I said, the hyenas in Lion King, very obviously being stereotyped as Black and not being educated, that would go over someone else's head who isn't part of my community, and I'd bring it to their attention. For those children who grow up in households where they don't have the luxury of someone else who walks life different from them to bring it to their attention, they will adopt these preconceived ideas even if they don't know it. And that's the danger. You have these mums, and we always know about these people who are in protected bubbles. You have these middle-class white mums who have the luxury to have petitions and have these online forums where they can govern what does and doesn't go into their children's education, their view range. They have the luxury to do that, and they can say, okay, you know what, I don't like this sexualized behavior that's coming from this skunk. Well, what about other people who don't have the same power in those platforms, and they want to challenge the way that gay people are represented in cartoons, or the way that ethnic minorities are represented in cartoons? Where does their voice come in? And does it, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Nishi, I'm just saying, is it right when it's white and somebody else wants to say something, but when it comes from a different group or other people who are pushed to the fringes of society, when they say it, it's no, we can capitalize off whatever that is just for the sense of humor?
Wait, so you're basically asking, wait, can you ask that again? Sorry, just the final bit. Like, is it basic? So basically, is it? Let me restart that. It's basically, is the comedy element worth all these kind of negative images?
Yes.
No, I think so. Okay.
And sorry, no, hold on. Yes, that's part of the question, yes. But also what I'm trying to say is that, is it only dangerous when it affects a certain type of person, and it's not dangerous? Because the things that we're saying, or some of the things that's been brought up, especially like I said about, for example, the community and the representation and like gender roles, that's not things that I've just heard of today. They've been voiced many a times. So why is it that only one side of it, like Pepe Le Pew, why is it only that side that would be seen as dangerous, but something else, like you said, might be, oh, well, it's a cartoon, so it doesn't really matter?
You know, I'm not sure. You know, I think
it's a slippery slope.
You kind of, yeah, it is a slippery slope. But I also think it's that thing where, okay, if you're talking about childhood specifically, and like what is dangerous for children to consume and children to watch, and who ultimately has the power? Because as also something you said a bit earlier is that cartoons cartoons are created. Cartoons, there is a human being behind the cartoon, and there is also kind of that risk when we have this debate. And I've also fallen into that trap where we see the cartoon as kind of an inanimate, kind of innocuous thing, rather than something that's manufactured based on a creator's ideas or ideology. So I was thinking more that, you know, if you're trying to understand what makes an idea dangerous for a child, like what do they learn from different things? And I think this goes, I guess, far beyond even cartoons and into kind of, I don't know if it's called like childhood culture, but the kind of toys or games or anything that kids play. And like, again, I come back to this idea of like, in my mind, scapegoating, because cartoons don't exist in and of themselves in the sense that they are part of that wider landscape of the way that kids interact, play, and kind of used to having fun. So whether that is, you know, like playing with guns or really sexualized Barbie dolls or really hyper-masculine Ken dolls or all these different things, which, you know, it's all part of the same fabric. So do we then say, okay, like all children's toys should be censored or, I guess, sense checked in a way that ensures that every single thing that goes out to all kids and the games they play, and, you know, if they're so subtly affected by all of this stuff, we need to have changed the wider landscape too, because cartoons are just one small piece of that puzzle. Yeah, it doesn't really answer your question, but you know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah,
if you're
no,
asking what,
Yeah.
yeah.
I get what you're saying. I think that we do things as we do better when we know better. That's where I kind of stand on this. Now, I believe that they could have rejigged the character of Pepe Le Pew. I really think they could have. And I think they could have done something with his character instead of completely writing him out or cutting out his scenes. But I agree. Cartoons aren't made in a vacuum. They are probably a reflection of the society at the time. The same with the dolls, the same with the toys. They're a reflection of, like, Barbie was it a reflection of the ideal of beauty at the time, which was blonde haired, slim. That ideal has now changed to like darker hair, darker features, and you know, probably a bit more curvy. And that's the sort of things that we now see, and the things that we have probably, okay, speak for myself, that I have tried to emulate in certain areas. Not the brunette thing, I'm black, so you know what I mean. But the point is, like, society, we only have the images of beauty or success or power or whatever as it is at the time. And I think that that's why we need to start rethinking things as we start to have more knowledge, because the way we can say, oh, those cartoons were racist, I think that's a very easy win. It's very easy to see the racial undertones, and the Jim Crow things probably weren't offensive at the time because it was the lived reality of the white majority at the time that were making this. So it probably seems very normal and probably very fine, but there were probably a lot of people who felt uncomfortable with it. And I think when we pick up sexism, misogyny, consent, those things, those lines are grayer. They're more difficult to pick out. And I think that that's why this is even a debate, because it can be so subtle. How do we know one man's... Okay, let me be very... Consent is a tough one in some instances, because you can see someone saying, you know, I saw something in Being Mary Jane with Gabrielle Union, and I thought that, wow, that scene was phenomenal. And like, I had never even thought about it. She was kissing a guy in bed and she was looking a bit sad, and he stopped kissing her and he was like, I'm not going to go until you tell me to continue. And she was just like, he was just like, no, you don't look okay. I'm not going to carry on until you tell me to continue. And I was just thinking, wow, like, he's stopping. They're trying to feed in this idea of, you know, not because it was a yes 10 minutes ago doesn't mean that it's a yes now. And those ideas of checking in, if you've seen that something isn't okay, then doing that. In terms of consent, in terms of kissing, is it every time that you're going to want to have a guy ask you for consent when he kisses you? You know, you're in the moment, you might look at each other, but those are the times when people can be like, I didn't want it. Well, she looked like she did, and blah, blah, blah. And I think if we're starting to try and make some areas that are seemingly grey be a bit more clear cut for the younger generation, I don't really have a problem with us trying to rework those narratives, but I don't think it's about necessarily throwing everything out. I think we can start from where we saw things and try and rework them now. But I think because we grew up in a certain generation, we're going to feel like some things are okay. The same way our parents are going to think some things are okay that we would now think are completely crazy and absurd. Like, things change, and there's going to be things that our children, grandchildren, God willing, if we have them, will be like, I can't believe you thought that was what consent was. And we're like, well, at the time, that was as far as we had come.
No, I completely agree with you on that. I think you've summed it up beautifully again. You're good at doing that. But yeah, no, I completely agree with you with that. And I do think, though, going off what you've said and going back to Nishi's original point, Pepe Le Pew's character, I don't actually think needed to be cancelled. I think what they should have done is kind of flip the narrative and even put in an educational moment there for children. Maybe he could have come back different and it been like, yeah, over the, I don't know how they're going to film it and say maybe they went off for the summer, I don't know. But maybe for the summer he went to summer camp and he learned what consent is and learned appropriate behaviour. And that could have been a powerful message in itself there to kind of reform and show that as time has gone on, yes, it's been a completely different society to when it was made and to how it's made now, but show that in the cartoon and show that reflection and that adaptation of education and how society has taken that on board and then pushed that through to cartoon. Because to go from one extreme of it being like that to him not being there anymore, it's like, wow, you're just going to kill off all the characters then and not really give us like a teaching point. But I'm assuming we could talk about this for ages. I just wanted to thank everyone for watching and listening to Ethnically Speaking, but let's definitely keep the conversation going. Let us know in the comments down below, what are your thoughts? Do you think cancelling culture for cartoons has gone too far? For a summary of everything we've spoken about today, head over to the unitedmelaningroup.com/ESO76. There'll also be a link in the description below. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Ethnically Speaking will be back on Friday. But until then, wear your masks, wash your hands, and most of all, stay safe.